New York's controversial stop-and-frisk policy has long been criticized by those unjustly targeted by police. Since 2001, officers have conducted more than 4.5 million stops, but more than 90% of those stopped were innocent of any crime. Despite the widespread use of stop-and-frisk, the practice stayed largely out of the media spotlight. In 2008, a judge ordered the release of the previous 10 years of NYPD stop-and-frisk data. That's when the public started to learn about the extent of the program. Longtime activist Jose LaSalle says before the release of data, many viewed stop and frisk positively.
People really believed that the presence of the police was really helping out, so the community didn't want to get involved. So it was harder for us to get more people involved with us, or recruit more people, because people really believed that that policy was working and it was keeping the community safe.
After the New York Civil Liberties Union started to release the data, activists had more concrete evidence to use in their campaigns. But police continued to stop an increasing number of people every year, reaching nearly 700,000 in 2011. 87% were Black or Latino, and nearly 9 out of 10 were not charged with a crime. Last year, activists decided to step up their campaign, launching a series of demonstrations to actively resist stop and frisk. In October and November 2011, hundreds rallied in Harlem and Brownsville, two communities of color heavily targeted by the practice. Jamel Mims is an organizer with the Stop Mass Incarceration Network.
The terrain has actually changed in significant and profound ways since even just a year ago.
Mims, Princeton professor Cornel West, and dozens of others were arrested for blockading the entrance to the Harlem police precinct. He says the increase in awareness and activism around stop and frisk and racial profiling has been dramatic.
Where folks didn't know about stop and frisk, where folks didn't know about, kind of due to both objective situations and reactions and repression by the state, things like Ramarley Graham, things like Trayvon Martin, these same contradictions that the state foments that continue to continuously arise, as well as because of the conscious effort of people that have put their bodies on the line and actually, began a movement against stop and frisk earlier, last year in October.
In 2012, a growing number of media outlets started covering stop and frisk, forcing New York City officials to address the controversial program publicly. Glenn Ford of Black Agenda Report credits the civil disobedience and support of the Occupy movement for propelling stop and frisk into mainstream discourse.
Since Occupy was getting a lot of coverage after a while from the corporate media, stop and frisk became something, part of the language that the corporate media learned how to speak. And that's why now it is not an unfamiliar subject.
Other groups have also helped to keep stop and frisk in the spotlight. A federal civil rights lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of stop and frisk was granted class action status and will go to trial next spring. The NYCLU, Center for Constitutional Rights, and community organizations began a campaign called Communities United for Police Reform, which aims to pass legislation banning discriminatory policing practices in New York. The NYCLU also launched a free stop and frisk mobile app that allows residents to document and share police misconduct. To bolster such efforts, in June, thousands answered the NAACP's calls for a silent march down Manhattan's Fifth Avenue to protest stop and frisk. The march was peaceful, but after it ended, some protesters refused to disperse, and police used physical force against them. Police arrested several, including the sister of activist Christina Gonzalez, who was known to the department for filming police interactions with residents.
She was beaten in her face, had her hair pulled, she was dragged off, with her breasts exposed, chained up in the back of a police car, and then driven to another place and let out of the car with no charges at all. So my sister committed absolutely no crime, and that's why they didn't charge her for one.
Gonzalez thinks police deliberately targeted her family member because of her own activism against stop and frisk. Last summer, she discovered a police flyer that included mugshot photos of her and her partner, labeled them as professional agitators, and listed their home address.
I joked about it last year when we first started this thing. A friend of ours would say, I won't stop until every cop in this city knows my name. Well, guess what? We've achieved that. And I think it's really something to be proud of.
Disorderly conduct and assault charges against Gonzalez were recently dropped, and her partner was acquitted of a similar charge. They, along with 11 others, will be in court Wednesday for charges stemming from the November 2011 protest. Last month, Mims and 3 other activists were found guilty of disorderly conduct. They'll be sentenced in January. Despite the ongoing legal challenges, the work by activists and advocacy groups may be having an impact. A Quinnipiac poll in November found that 53% of New Yorkers disapprove of stop and frisk, up from 49% last March. Additionally, the City Council has been holding hearings on the new law aimed to rein in police abuses, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg pledged last summer to decrease the number of stops. That did happen, according to the NYCLU, which says stops in the third quarter declined by 30% compared to the same period in 2011. Police are still stopping an estimated 1,400 people a day, the majority black and Latino. Activists say they'll continue to organize against stop and frisk and a criminal justice system that incarcerates disproportionate numbers of people of color. Reporting for The Real News and FSRN, this is Jessel Noor in New York.